Hi, welcome to Plato's Cave, your speakeasy for ideas, where Tom and Dave show us how to think like the American founders. Grab a drink if you'd like. The conversation about saving our republic is about to begin.
Tom, it's another week. We're back in Plato's Cave.
Yeah, here we are. You know, we talked about Plato's Cave last week, and I just want to kind of reinforce, you know, it's what we've named our new studio, and I hope people are enjoying the new digs. I think it's kind of a cool look and feel down here. And also the name of we've really rebranded our podcast. It is Plato's Cave. And, you know, that's one of those things that it's a famous allegory. Millions of people who took Philosophy 101 in college, right, will say, oh, yeah, I remember that allegory. I know all about it. And yet the truth is very few people actually think through what that means today.
Yep.
In fact, I would go so far as to argue the vast majority of Americans, they think they're the philosopher. They think they're out in the sunlight when, in fact, they're actually in the cave.
Yep.
And we're coming back to the cave to help encourage our fellow citizens to stop buying into the dogmas, stop buying into the political correctness, stop buying into all of the unfounded doctrines and assumptions of the postmodern progressive world. Think for yourself. That's what it means to go into the sunlight. Is really start thinking for yourself. Stop trusting and swallowing everything that's fed to you, hook, line, and sinker, and think for yourself.
When you say we're coming back into the cave, do we need to preface this? And if anybody doesn't get this, go back and watch last week's podcast.
Yeah.
Do we need to preface this by saying, don't kill us? I mean,
well, that really depends on how successful we are, Dave. One of the barometers of our success will be the intensity of threats that we receive. The more successful, the more influence we have, the more serious the threats will become.
There are a lot of great speakers, a lot of great thinkers out there who do get those threats on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And their response, when I've gotten to have some conversation with them, it says, they always say, that means I'm doing something right.
Yes.
So you're right. I mean, the more successful we are,
that's right,
essentially the more danger that comes with this. I want to take that into something we talked about last week, and we're going to dive in here pretty quickly into the meat of this, because we've been promising now for 3 weeks that we'd get to it, and we're going to today.
Yeah.
Right around the 50-minute mark of last week's podcast, we got into a little bit of a conversation about this idea of moral right and wrong. And one of the opportunities where you're supposed to just say, you like chocolate ice cream, I like vanilla ice cream. That's okay. We don't have to get along.
Yeah.
We don't have to agree. We can still get along. We can still be friends, even though you like one flavor of ice cream and I like another. Then you have the situations where somebody's actually hurting somebody, where somebody's actually doing something that is foundationally wrong.
Yeah.
You are hurting people. A lot of times that's a progressive. If you're a progressive, you are actually hurting people. And in doing that, I still get a lot of people saying to me, yeah, but that's just what they believe. And you believe one thing and they believe another, and you have to accept others for their opinions.
Yeah.
And the comment you made in last week's podcast, I don't think gets said enough. And I wanted to reiterate that as we lead into this conversation about moral right and wrong and where that comes from and the source of law.
Hopefully I said something good.
You said something really good that I don't think a lot of people think about.
Yeah.
The most popular politician in the 1850s, 1860s, maybe even, you'll know the dating a little bit better than I will, maybe late 1840s, was Stephen A. Douglas.
Oh, sure, right.
And Stephen A. Douglas's most famous doctrine was popular sovereignty.
Yes.
If I don't like slavery, I don't have to own slaves. But if you like slavery, it's not for me to say that you can't own slaves.
That's right.
And there comes a line, and I think that's something for all of us to explore, is what is that line that says, no, I can't sit here and say, well, you like chocolate ice cream, I like vanilla. Right. That's okay with me. But you like slavery and I don't. You like murder and I don't. No, I can't give to each their own and say, well, you can like what you like and I'm going to like what I like.
You're absolutely right. And I mean, there's a number of interesting things packed into what you just said. One of them is, you know, when you say sometimes we just have differences of opinions that truly are differences of tastes, different tastes in food or drink or sports teams or these, right? Having one preference over another doesn't involve violating anybody else's rights, right? I can root for any team I want. That doesn't violate your rights.
To an extent. I mean, I've seen a lot of people violate others' rights because they don't like the team that the other person does.
Well, that usually involves at some point you make a fist, right, and swing at somebody or something like that.
I mean, I know you well enough. There's going to come that point where that Red Sox fan is going to step a little bit too far over the line, and all of a sudden their rights, their personal natural rights are going to come into question.
It's a great thing. Just 2 days ago, one of my good friends, Len, I haven't seen him in a long time, and he's a diehard Boston Red Sox fan, lived in Boston, and we sit down and we have a great time whenever we have an opportunity, and we drink beer together and laugh and joke. But that's what it means to disagree on things, right, that don't involve principles, don't involve the rights of others. When you point to some people actually hurting others, my hunch is a lot of listeners, their minds immediately go to individuals. If an individual is assaulting someone, right, or stealing from someone, or raping someone, or murdering, and I think for the most part, most Americans could agree that those are wrong actions that should be criminalized. Now, even that today, in this strange postmodern progressive world where growing numbers of people are pushing back against reality, you see, for example, out in California, even basic acts of theft are now being challenged. You can walk into a Walgreens, and as long as you steal under a certain dollar amount, nobody really does anything. They've effectively legalized theft in California. But you pointed to a kind of injury, a kind of violation of rights that's a hard thing for many people to understand because it is mediated by government. Government's in the middle. Okay. When progressives are violating the rights of fellow citizens, they themselves don't actually go and take someone's money or take someone's property or take control over somebody else's business. And so I think it's hard for many progressives and people who are friends with progressives to see the actual violations that are done. All they're doing is they're going down and casting ballots. They're just voting for people they think are nice, friendly folks like Joe Biden and many other progressive Democrats who then turn around and use the power of government to take money, right, to take property, to start regulating businesses, to do all these things. And that one step of mediation makes it really hard for many Americans to see the actual damage that's done. And so it becomes very easy for Americans to say, well, we just have differences of opinions, conservatives, and there are constitutionalists who respect property, and there are progressives who don't so much, but we can all be friends. And what we're seeing is it's increasingly difficult to be friends with someone who actually votes in a way that harms my rights, that takes my money, takes my property, regulates and controls my business.
Or just makes it harder for me to live my daily life. It doesn't even have to be the visible harm of you're stealing my money, you're making it hard for me to operate my business. I mean, those are true harms. Those are really significant. Right. The government is putting certain companies out of business altogether because of their regulations, because of their rules. But then just take it to the things that they do that don't necessarily have a direct effect on what I do on my day-to-day life for work or the money that I have. But I think about things like gas prices and energy prices. Right. I think about things like supermarket shelves. I have been trying to go in to grocery stores for the last 2 weeks looking for certain things that I literally, I'm a creature of habit. I go into the grocery store and I buy the same thing every week. Yeah. Every I go in the same day, I get the same thing every week. It's why I love this new delivery grocery shopping. Yeah. I don't need to go to the grocery store. They save my list. I go and I buy it. And it's always about the same price. Right. This week, the last 2 weeks actually, I've done my grocery shopping and I do the drive up, just pick up. They bring it out to the car. Half of it wasn't there. Half of my grocery list wasn't there.
And it's not because they forgot.
Not because they forgot. It's because they don't have it. They said, we don't know if and when we're ever getting it again. Yes. Those are things the government does that I want to buy something. Somebody's producing something and I want to buy it. And there's some government regulation that's preventing it from getting to the supermarket so I can purchase
or
it.
Executive order, right, that involves shutdowns and lockdowns. Yes. I mean, what we're seeing here all across the United States is the reality that many of us were pointing out 2 years ago. You cannot use government force to come and shut people down, close businesses, force people to stay home, and expect productivity to remain the same. You can't. And when productivity goes down, that's not some abstract economic concept, right? That means when you go to the grocery store, you're going to see barren shelves because there simply hasn't been as much productivity. Distribution chains have been disrupted, in some cases completely brought to a halt. And so it hurts real people. It makes life really difficult. And one of the things I want to promote through the Vino and Veritas Society, I want our members to become increasingly confident and comfortable saying to fellow citizens, stop telling us how much you care about people when the way you vote hurts people. Yeah. Stop actually hurting people first, and then we'll have a conversation about how much you think you care or say that you care about others. Because your actions are doing far more harm than the good that comes from you saying that you actually care people.
Well, and this goes back to, for those who are coming into the Vino and Veritas Society new, when you go back through our website, you can go look at the case studies. We did an entire case study about the idea that under progressivism, it's about intentions, not results. Right. And I would encourage anybody who wants to explore what you just said in more detail, go back and look at that case study. You did a phenomenal video lecture. It was about 45 minutes long about that, and then we had an essay that accompanied it, with evidence, with proof. So for anybody who says, you and I believe that, but can we really prove that? No, you proved
yes,
it.
We can.
You showed the evidence. You showed the proof. You showed the quotes. Yeah. This goes back to FDR, talking about Republicans acting in the ice of indifference.
That's right.
And that a government that cares and that tries is better than one that doesn't. There's a whole discussion about whether or not a hands-off government is one that doesn't care or one that actually says we trust our citizens to actually use the free market to help each other, and that's going to cause a better situation.
Well, there's a whole side of that is worthy of a podcast discussion in itself, and that is, if you're in a tough spot and you're struggling for whatever reason, the worst thing for me to do is to come along and take money from you. That's not going to help you. It kind of reminds me, I mean, I don't know how much, if people remember this or not, when George Washington died, he caught a terrible cold. It had probably settled into his lungs. He was dealing with sickness. And the medical science at that day was to drain blood out of someone's suffering. The idea was that there must be some bad stuff in the blood, so get rid of the blood and you get rid of the bad stuff. So at the moment when people were their most vulnerable physically, they had fevers and they were sick and dehydrated, the physicians would come along and cut a cord of blood out of you and drain it. Anyway, that notion, when a man is most sick and hurting, you don't drain the blood out of him. But same thing with, you don't drain money out of his bank account. And yet that's the whole progressive notion. Oh, you're unemployed and you're hungry? We're going to come take more money away from you. Right. The best thing that a government could do is just stay away and say, you keep, even if what you have is little, you keep it and you use it for the things you most need.
But Tom, George Washington was trusting the science.
It's true, he did. And look where it got him.
That was the science of the day. And I mean, it's amazing. I mean, you think about how things we learn more and we learn more and we learn more, but we never know everything.
Never know.
You're always learning. You're always a student.
And when you turn from biological sciences, medical science to moral science, and there is a moral science. The Latin root of our word science was scientia, and scientia, the Latin word simply means to know. Right. Ways of knowing. So there are all kinds of ways of knowing, beginning with looking around. What do you see, and start using your reason to investigate why things are the way that they are. So there are physical sciences. There are also moral sciences. We can know about moral things, moral phenomena. And you mentioned, I want to bring this back to your reference to Stephen Douglas, because it's gonna lead us right into our main topic, morality and law. There's this ancient notion. This is not a new thing. I mentioned last week, this was the argument Thrasymachus made in Plato's Republic, that there is no justice, there is no objective principle of moral right that we can discover and should live up to. He simply reduces everything to power. This is a power struggle. And whoever's the most powerful will do what he wants to do. And whatever he says, or maybe it's a group of people, whatever they say is just and right, that's just and right. Justice is a kind of illusion. It's a myth. It's not something real. That ancient kind of nihilism, that moral relativism, it had a spotlight put on it in American history because the most talented politician of the middle part of the 19th century, other than Abraham Lincoln, was Stephen A. Douglas.
Right.
And Douglas was a fairly prominent sitting United States senator. And there was a great controversy arose. This was in 1850. California, want to remember that gold was discovered out in 1849. The 49ers, which is now the name of a football team, I think might be going to a step ahead in the playoffs. Yeah. The 49ers meant a huge migration of people out to California to try to get rich off of gold. And California wanted to come into the Union as a new state in 1850. And here was the wrinkle. When they drafted their state constitution, it prohibited slavery. They said no slavery in this new state of California. Democrats in Congress and across the United States went nuts. They were outraged. They said, how dare you prohibit slavery from going to this new state? We are citizens. We Democrats in Alabama and South Carolina, and we have a constitutional right to our property, which includes our slaves. And if we want to go to California, by golly, we should be free to go to California with our property.
Right.
Just like you Northern Whigs and Republicans can go to California with your property. And we almost entered a civil war in 1850. This thing, we had members of Congress beating each other up, all kinds of terrible things happening. The great statesman in Congress at that time was then an old man named Henry Clay, who had famously brokered these great compromises, maybe the most famous being the Compromise of 1820. And so he said, hey, I can broker another compromise. He failed. He couldn't. Tensions were so heated. We were so close to civil conflict. And a fellow named Stephen A. Douglas rose up and said, I got the solution. What if we promote this idea of popular sovereignty? Some parts of the country that want slavery, they can have slavery. Other parts that don't like it, they don't have to have it. We don't have to be judgmental. We can all just get along, right? And of course, this topic he's talking about involves the grossest violation of the rights of fellow human beings held in bondage as slaves. Against that Douglas position of relativism, we have Abraham Lincoln.
Right.
Lincoln comes up and he says, no, popular sovereignty is grossly immoral. And it was a hard case for Lincoln to make in public because Douglas's whole position was there is no right and wrong. Slaveholders have their preferences, and abolitionists who hate slavery have their preferences, and there's no way to judge who's right or who's wrong because there's no objective principle of morality. And I want our members to understand the Great Seduction then in the 1850s as well as now. It's a very seductive idea because it seems so easy. We don't have to make any judgments. We don't have to fight with anybody. I can just have, I like chocolate ice cream and I don't like slavery. Those are my preferences. And maybe you or someone else likes the opposite. You like a different kind of ice cream and you do like slavery. We don't have to judge each other because we all agree ahead of time that there's no right and wrong. And that is incredibly seductive. And that's what makes Lincoln's work so hard, is to stand up in a nation of people who are growing increasingly relativistic, increasingly dismissing moral principles and moral ideas, and say, no, wait. Slavery is intrinsically wrong. It's a violation of the fundamental natural rights of fellow human beings, and it doesn't matter how popular it is. That was one of his critiques of popular sovereignty. It doesn't matter how popular. Maybe popular sovereignty is approved by 70% of the voters, or 80%, or 90%, or 100%. that still doesn't change the wrongness of slavery into a right.
Right.
That was the challenge for Lincoln. And in a way, we have the same challenge today. We had ended the last week's podcast by pointing to sort of the great difference between our modern moral landscape and the classical moral landscape.
Sure.
Then we'll reframe this here for the purpose of our discussion. So the modern, progressive, postmodern moral landscape, number one, it's dominated by a rejection of moral reason. Both camps I'm going to describe really reject the idea that reason can discover any sort of principles of right and wrong. And what we have as a result is we have one side, we have progressives, postmoderns, who say there is no objective moral truth. There's no moral truth that is non-arbitrary. That's any assertion of morality is just a cultural prejudice, an opinion. And then we have, opposing that, we have people who insist there is moral truth, and it's revealed truth. It's religious truth. It's divine truth. It comes from God, and therefore only believers of the right God or believers of the right religion have access to this kind of moral truth. It's not something that can be discovered by human reason. It's something that one finds if one adopts a certain kind of sectarian religious faith.
Before you go on to that third one that we talked about in the last podcast, we've talked about this several times, and we have our members that have been with us for a while.
Yeah.
They're probably sick of me reminding everybody about this.
Yeah.
As we keep growing, I think it's really important to continue to emphasize the Aristotelian, the Aristotle thinking on reason, and why reason, when you talk about reason, why it's so critically important. And that goes back to that spectrum of God and beast. And like I said, there's a lot of people who are like, all right, Dave, we get it. I've heard you say this enough. You've heard me talk about it enough.
Right.
But it is important that we always come back to this. Reason is so critical because it is what separates us from animals. It's what separates us from every other living being on earth.
Yes.
Every other living being on earth acts according to their instincts, their appetites, their desires. They don't think through, should I do this? They just say, my instinct is to do this, so I will do it. The crass but best example of that is a lion in the Sahara or in the Serengeti or wherever lions are found today.
Right.
A lion doesn't go up to the lioness and ask it, can I have sex with you?
That's right.
When the lion wants to have sex,
Right.
the lion goes up and finds the lioness and does its thing.
Or they fight, and whoever ends up being the most powerful
Right.
does what it wants to do. Yeah.
Right. On the other hand, we as human beings, our ability to discover what is right, what is proper, what is appropriate,
Yes.
is done through reason.
Yes.
That reason is what allows us to control our instincts and figure out what is it that we can talk, what we can do, what is appropriate to do, and what is a violation of somebody else's rights. And that's where something like rape comes in, right? It is in the animal kingdom, that lion, he's technically raping that lioness. Is that wrong?
Right.
Are they able to converse? Is it able to process this idea that, man, she's fighting back. Maybe I shouldn't do this. No.
Right.
He overpowers her and he does what he wants to do. We have come to this ability to conclude, if she says no, I have to respect that.
Right. Or I should.
I should respect that.
And if I don't respect that, if I'm a human being, I don't respect that, I've just engaged in a gross injustice. I've just committed a wrong.
And it's wrong because we have reason. It's wrong because we are the only beings capable of reasoning our way to understanding that. And I'm going to annoy people by the end of at some point because I'm going to keep coming back to that.
It is fundamental and it's important. And I don't know that we can actually talk about this too much because we live in a culture today that is enamored with the notion of following your passion, following your appetite. This is the motto you find on almost every university and college campus today in the country, that the whole purpose of going to school is to follow your passion or your appetite or your desire.
Right.
If you really think through what that means, it's saying live like the lion. The lion follows its desire, its appetite. I would love to see a university that has a big billboard that says, do what's right, do what is just, right? Which is oftentimes it's very different than what one desires or what one wants or what one's appetite is. And so distinguishing our capacity for reason as something separate from and higher than our appetites and our desires, something that is capable of governing our appetites and desires, is sort of the first step toward recovering a full, complete, robust notion of what human nature is. That notion of moral reason, we've more or less rejected and abandoned. If you went and asked, I don't know, who's a prominent scientific, Anthony Fauci.
I was just going to say, that's an easy answer.
If you went and asked Anthony Fauci, he said, hey, Tony, can human reason discover principles of moral right and moral wrong? Using the scientific method, right? Observing and creating hypotheses, and can reason know that? My hunch is, I don't know this for sure, but my hunch is he would simply find that laughable. That's ridiculous. What modern science has done to nature is reduced the view of nature to mere matter, just material things, atoms and molecules that bounce around and sometimes hook together, and physics and chemistry and biology, right, study how matter moves and predicts what's going to happen in the course of that motion. What we've lost in nature, the view of our modern view of nature, is that nature actually contains moral precepts. And we can discover, for example, by studying human nature, we can discover what is good, what is conducive to human happiness and human flourishing, and what is not. And that is that third way, that classical way that was part of the classical conversation, that there's something called natural right. Later thinkers will call it natural law. That very classical notion is embedded right there in our own Declaration of Independence, which refers not only to the laws of God, it also refers to the laws of nature. In fact, it first refers to the laws of nature and then nature's God.
Right, and it's nature's God,
God.
Not just God. It's the laws of nature and nature's God.
In fact, it's God without a personal name, right? There's no particular proper noun. It's not Yahweh. It's not Jesus. It's not Allah. It is nature's God, which is a kind of philosophic concept. It's an acknowledgement of an ultimate highest being, but it doesn't give a personality. It doesn't identify a particular sectarian personality. And this might be one of the great challenges here, when we have fights. I mean, it's really interesting, isn't it? Step back for a moment and think, we live in the most progressive era of American history. America today is more progressive by any metric than ever before. We have more government regulation. Our government is more progressive. Our culture is more progressive, more politically correct, all these things. And you would think, as a very progressive nation that has adopted, non-judgmentalism and tolerance and all these progressive notions, well, we should all be getting along more than ever. And the truth is the opposite.
Yeah.
Not only are we not getting along, we're more divided, arguably, perhaps, than ever before in American history. I mean, things are as ugly now. The only moment in our own history that comes close to what we have today is the period immediately preceding the American Civil War.
Right.
We were very divided then. We're very divided now. Will this result in the same way? Nobody knows for sure what the future is going to be. But whatever is going on with our progressive culture, it's not leading to peaceful agreement and cooperation. It is leading to ugly, nasty division and hatred and loathing. And so as we fight over policies, we fight over laws, and those fights about political subjects always end up being moral fights about what's right and what's wrong. Everyone. Whether it's a law, whether it's Build Back Better, whether it's the Supreme Court considering they're going to be reviewing Roe versus Wade and abortion case law, whether it's laws and policies about immigration or taxes, any of these things always end up being moral debates. Sure. What is right, what's wrong, what's fair, what's unfair. And we've removed from our vocabulary, we've removed from our thinking about these things, this entire realm of rich, deep, important concepts, that notion of natural right, of the natural law, that we can actually reason about basic moral things and come to a conclusion. And I suppose when you think through the history of this natural right reasoning, one of the challenges is you have this relativism and nihilism that's always been seductive. It was seductive in the days of Thrasymachus. It's seductive in the days of Stephen Douglas. Now, today, that relativism and nihilism is given the stamp of approval by the most esteemed universities in the world, right? And the media and the chattering political class, like all the institutions of influence adopt that kind of relativism and nihilism. And then you have
before you go on, can we explain to our audience what that is and why that is so seductive? And I'll start it, but you could probably take it to that next level. The reason nihilism and moral relativism is so seductive to people, at least from my perspective, is it goes back to that sense of feeling like you're good, that inner feeling of it's okay to believe what I believe, right? And nihilism, if there is no true right and wrong, if there is no real natural true right and wrong, then if I believe something and for me that's true, then I'm okay. Then my decision making is okay. My feelings are okay. I'm okay believing in what I believe in.
But by definition, if we start with the premise of nihilism, there is no objective truth.
Correct.
Then you cannot be in error. You see how safe that is, how convenient. You cannot hold an erroneous opinion because all opinions are just arbitrary and unsupported, right? Whereas if there was some truth, there was some standard, and we said, here's the premise of what is true, then your opinions might differ from what's true. You might be in error. There might be a reason to judge. Either you judge yourself or others judge you, and nihilism basically removes that. And so you can feel good about yourself no matter what you believe because you can't be wrong.
Right. So that's like the kid going in and taking a test and saying 2 + 2 = 5. Yeah, but to me, there's no truth. There's no right and wrong. Right. So you have to give me 100%. I get an A in your class. And if you don't do that, you're hurting me. You're harming me because you're refusing to accept my truth. And my truth is that 2 + 2 = 5.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I just wanted to make sure everybody kind of understands when you're talking about the dangers of nihilism and moral relativism, what that means and really why that's so threatening.
And, and what it does is the challenge is very few people actually think it through to its conclusion. I mean, someone like Friedrich Nietzsche, one of the things that makes Nietzsche an incredible and unusual thinker is he actually thought, as strange as this sounds, he thought nihilism through to its conclusion. Mm-hmm. And for him, nihilism is not this sexy, fun thing. It doesn't mean, oh, I get to do anything I want and I get to hold any opinion I want because I can't be wrong. It was sheer terror. It means anything that I think is important is not intrinsically important, is not intrinsically true, is not intrinsically good. It means my life and the life of everyone else and every idea ever held by anyone is essentially meaningless, is purposeless, right? It's a void, it's a vacuum. And so he sees it as this terrifying, horrible thing.
For those who are movie buffs, the movie The Big Lebowski with a big cult following, you've seen it. I take from the laugh. There's the scene with John Goodman and the nihilists, right? And
I have to do a quick shout. My two older kids know about it, and they joke because I do this impersonation of the we are nihilists, Lebowski. We're gonna come back and cut off your Johnson. We believe in nothing.
but that's the point, right?
Yes.
And in this movie, they're willing to do anything because there is no right and wrong.
Yeah.
And you just have to think through where that goes. And when we talk about harm, when we started this podcast talking about, this idea that you have to start having a line where it says, okay, I can accept that you and I have differences in opinion until you're starting to harm somebody.
Yeah.
And in some circumstances, you have the caricature of the nihilists in the Big Lebowski. But you've put this in other terms. So I'm giving you total credit for this. I'm not trying to. You put it in terms of math and building bridges, right?
Right.
And somebody who says there's no truth, are they going to tell me that the Pythagorean theorem isn't true?
Right.
Are they going to tell me that these dimensions don't work? And am I going to drive across a bridge that they don't understand the truth in math, the truth in geometry, and say, okay, I'm building a bridge and I know how to do it. And some government contractor says, well, we're going to hire you to build the bridge.
Right.
And you're a friend, so I'm going to just take care of you.
Right.
And I'm going to give you this contract. I don't really care if you're good at building bridges. I don't care if you accept the truth about geometry and Euclid.
Yep.
Instead, just go build the bridge for me.
And even if someone rejects, if they say, well, that's math and that's physics, okay, take it to the realm of moral nihilism. Someone who says there is no moral truth at all. There is no right and wrong. There should be no moral restrictions on my own behavior. You want that person to babysit your children.
Right.
After they have told you that there is nothing is off limits, there are no moral boundaries of right and wrong that should circumscribe or limit, human behavior. You mentioned, since you mentioned movies, someday, Dave, we might have to get in the business of movie reviews because we do a pretty good job in a very short period of time. I'm going to throw out two others that are a little more serious than the Big Lebowski. One was a movie with my favorite movie stars, Kiefer, Sutherland, and Sandra Bullock. When they were both pretty young, this movie came out a long time, 25 years ago or more, and I think it was called The Vanishing. This was not a big hit.
Okay.
And it has what's the guy who plays the Lebowski? He's in it. He's the bad guy.
Not Jeff Daniels. It's the guy who kind of looks like Jeff Daniels.
Yes, it's not Jeff Daniels.
It'll hit me. Somebody help us out in the comments. Somebody give it to us.
The whole premise of the movie is Kiefer Sutherland and Sandra Bullock are a young, newly married couple on their honeymoon, and they stop at a gas station, and she disappears. They both go to the bathroom, and he comes out, and he waits and waits and waits, and eventually he goes into the women's bathroom. She's not in there, and she's gone. And his life falls apart, and he spends all of his money trying to find what happened to he can't find her. Years later, a guy contacts him. And this guy, he'd always been told he was a good, honest person, a good moral person, and he wanted to test himself. He said, well, I can only be good if I'm capable of being bad. If I'm not actually capable, if I'm programmed to do good and only good, if I'm like a moral robot, right, then I don't really deserve praise when I do good things. So I have to demonstrate to myself that I'm capable of doing something immoral. Yeah. And he had kidnapped and murdered her. And I don't think that's a terrible giveaway because this is a 25-year-old movie.
If you haven't seen it yet,
well,
too bad.
I apologize. There's another, and there's an older. This was a Hitchcock movie. I think the title was The Rope, and the entire thing takes place in this living room of some graduate students who are reading Nietzsche, and they're reading about nihilism and how all morality is an illusion, and they want to test to see if they engage in some gross immorality, if they'll have any pangs of conscience or anything. So they commit a murder, and they keep the murdered body in the living room. I won't give away where the murdered body is, and have a dinner party. So they have a bunch of friends over, including their professor, who's teaching them about Nietzsche. And so these are all just cinematic ways within the context of a movie to try to illustrate this challenge of the seduction of nihilism and moral relativism. And then we have, like I mentioned before, right? We have in these fights, we end up fighting over laws, politics, policies, and they always become moral disputes. And then opposing the nihilism and the relativism, we have people who insist that there is moral right, but you cannot know it unless you adopt their religious faith.
Right.
You must adopt their religious faith first before you can understand these precepts. And so in their own way, they're agreeing with the nihilists that reason cannot know, cannot discover. Unassisted reason, just looking at the world and studying and thinking, cannot discover right and wrong. It's a leap of religious faith. And so it tends to diminish the persuasiveness of their arguments and their critiques. It tends to limit their persuasiveness to fellow sectarian religious believers. And what we've removed is this whole big realm of natural right, this idea that nature, I think if you ask most people today about human nature, I mean, of course, there's the physical matter, the cells that make up our skin and bones and hair and all that kind of stuff. And then people would agree there are human instincts and appetites. We have desires. Mm-hmm. But if you asked, especially educated Americans, people who went to graduate school, is there something within human nature, some governing principle of how we should control our appetites and our desires? I think many Americans would say, no, absolutely not. To be authentic, which is another very postmodern word, to be authentic means to follow your passions, follow your appetites. Now, when typical progressives say that sort of thing, follow your truth, follow your passion, follow your... Yeah. What they have in mind is something like go get the kind of job you really enjoy, or do the hobbies that you really... If you like painting and someone made fun of you for painting, screw them, go enjoy painting. Right. They usually mean harmless things because they don't think through, well, Jeffrey Dahmer's appetite was not painting. Right. And it wasn't going and getting his dream job. It was raping and murdering young women. Like he genuinely enjoyed it. That was his passion. And if you try to have this conversation with a typical progressive American today, they'll say, oh, well, I'm not talking about that. Well, you might not be talking about, but I am. Stephen Douglas said, hey, we can all just get along here. He wasn't talking about beating slaves with chains, but guess what happened on the plantations? Slaves got beaten with chains and tortured and terrible things went on. And that was part of Lincoln's job, was to say, here's the conclusion. Here's the reality of what begins as this sophism, this pseudo-philosophic argument. I'm going to show you what the injustices that actually happen. And that's one of our challenges today.
Well, and Lincoln took it to that point of reminding people that it's not just, okay, so then you get people being whipped and beaten on these plantations, but it's wrong. Mm-hmm. It's one thing, and why is it wrong? If you want to know why is it wrong, because those people still had natural rights.
That's right.
You can't say that because they're the slave owner didn't believe in a certain God, or didn't believe in moral truth, didn't believe they were either the slave owner was a nihilist, or didn't believe in the God, or believe that God told them that slavery was okay.
In fact, let me give you this history sometimes has such strange twists that it becomes weirder than fiction. And case in point, leading up to the Civil War in America, there were some of the most influential, renowned theologians and preachers from southern states who were apologists for slavery. They were defenders of slavery. And their argument, I'm going to condense it down here, but in a nutshell, their argument was, we are Christians, and therefore we believe right and wrong is what God has willed to be right and wrong. And the way we know what God has willed is through special revelation. He has communicated through Moses, through Jesus, through other prophets, his will about what is right and wrong. And God has declared things like murder is wrong, theft is wrong. He never declared slavery was wrong. Mm-hmm. Just the opposite. He gave us instructions on how to conduct slavery, how a master should treat a slave, how a slave should treat a master, etc. And so these theologians and preachers were making a biblical, religious, pious defense and keep in mind, of a very ancient institution. I mean, slavery is as old as human nature. Mm-hmm. And some of these were brazen enough. These Southern theologians, they went on speaking tours in the North. They went to Boston, and they went to New York City, and they went to places like this. And they gave speeches in state legislatures and other prominent public places. And they said, you here in the North, especially you Republicans, this is as the Republican Party was being founded, and its whole purpose was to stop the spread of slavery. These Southern Christian theologians said, you Republicans who are opposed to slavery, you want to abolish slavery, you're atheists, you're nihilists.
Right.
You don't believe in a moral standard because you're clearly not Christian. You clearly don't believe in the Bible. Because if you did, you would be on our side. You would be defending the biblical foundation of slavery. You want to get rid of slavery, which means you're violating the will of God. You're a bunch of relativists and nihilists. So the Southern Christian view of slavery was not to apologize for slavery, was not to take the moral low road, not to have a guilty conscience. They took the moral and theological and biblical high road, and they say, we stand on the institution that existed in the days of Jesus and existed in the days of Moses, and that God has willed that we keep until he tells us to bring an end to slavery, which he hasn't done yet. And so it's just a fascinating moment in our own history that puts a spotlight on these deep philosophic questions. So if you have these Southern preachers making these biblical religious arguments and you're Lincoln, how do you respond to that? And that's no easy thing to do. And Lincoln is making an argument based on natural right, based on natural law, saying any human being anywhere, doesn't even matter what religious faith you have, simply by studying human nature, you can learn quickly that every human being has a free mind housed inside a physical body, and therefore nature indicates that my mind should govern my body. Who's going to control what my hands do? Who's going to control what my feet do? My mind should control my hands and feet. Your mind should control your hands and feet. The mind of every human being should govern the body in which it's housed, which is why slavery's wrong.
Right.
Because slavery is the mind of one human being attempting to control the body of another human being. And Lincoln says that's always wrong. That's inherently wrong. That is rationally wrong. And if you have a culture that disagrees, your culture is wrong. If you come from a tradition where slavery is prominent, your tradition is a bad tradition. And here Lincoln is borrowing from the American founders who made the same argument. They too condemned the wrongness of slavery and set us on this course of abolition because of its intrinsic injustice. And they were offering something very audacious. And that was to be judgmental in a rational way, in an objective way, not in a petty, small-souled way, right? Not judge people you don't like, but rather make judgments based on objective moral principles. And Lincoln said once, and he's right about this, if the mind cannot know that slavery's wrong, then the mind can't know that anything's wrong. Then it's impossible to know what's right and wrong. I would say in a similar way today, if you don't know that it's wrong to take someone else's money against his will, if you don't know that that's wrong, then you probably are incapable of knowing that anything is wrong.
Well, and I would argue slightly differently than that. And I would have I can't say that I would have corrected Lincoln. I'm not in no position to ever correct Lincoln. I would have made a suggestion to him. I would have said, this is something I grew up hearing all the time from my dad. There's a difference between can't and won't. This is if you don't know that slavery is wrong, you're refusing. You won't know that slavery is wrong. It's not that you can't. It's not that you're incapable. It's not that it's impossible. It's you are refusing to acknowledge that anything can be wrong. If you're refused to acknowledge that slavery is wrong, you refuse to acknowledge that anything's wrong. If you refuse to acknowledge that taking somebody's money against their will is wrong, then you're refusing to acknowledge that anything is wrong. And it goes along that way. Before we wrap up today, we have a lot of members who I think are sitting here saying, so wait a minute. These guys are saying to accept the American founding and to believe in the American idea, you have to reject religion. And I want to correct that.
Yes.
We are by no means going down that direction. And I want to talk a little bit about the three options and where that all fits in. So you were talking about sort of the moral relativism of religion as well as the moral relativism of nihilism. The moral relativism of religion goes back to something I think we talked about last week, if not the week before, which is this idea that if murder is wrong because God said it's wrong, does that mean that if through special revelation God said murder is right, that now murder is okay?
Right.
Or is it that third option where no, murder is naturally wrong? And I think the takeaway that I hope people get from this is this nihilistic perspective of progressivism. They're never going to get to that point of they refuse to acknowledge nature. They refuse to acknowledge the natural law. They're never going to get to that point of understanding or accepting. They're refusing, based on my earlier comment, they're refusing to accept the ideas that something can be right and wrong.
Well, I want to add very
Please,
briefly on. Here's the problem for postmodern progressives today. On the one hand, they refuse to accept the idea that there can be an objective moral truth. At the same time, they also don't accept their own nihilism. They
Yes.
contradict their own nihilism constantly whenever there's something they don't like. I mean, if you doubt this, ask a progressive about Donald Trump. And what you will instantly see, you're not going to hear moral relativism or not. You're going to hear the most confident assertions, right, of moral judgment.
Sure.
He is bad. He is terrible. He is just wrong. And then in the next conversation, they're sitting there saying, well, who's to say what's right and wrong? There's really no right and wrong. So it's hard to take postmodern progressives seriously when it's infused with such moral confusion.
Well, and in that sense, they're very similar to those who believe that murder is wrong because God said it's wrong. Mm-hmm. They are similar in that many postmodern progressives have their gods, their government gods, Anthony Fauci and Joe Biden and whoever else, Barack Obama, that Hillary Clinton, that are saying to them today, and it was Woodrow Wilson and FDR 100 years ago, and it was Dewey before that. So nobody thinks that I'm only talking about the current. If Anthony Fauci says Donald Trump is dangerous, well, he's my God. I am of the progressive religion of government, and he's my God, and he's telling me. And if Anthony Fauci changes his mind, it's a special revelation. And on the other side, if God changes through special revelation, changes his position, does that mean that murder can be okay? That third natural position doesn't.
Let me offer just a quick philosophic framework of what you just laid out, and that is to say, both sides that you just described agree that the source of right and wrong ultimately is will. In the case of progressive postmoderns, they say it's our will. If we will that something's wrong, then it's wrong for us. And if we will that something's right, then it's right for us. And if we will that there is no right and wrong, then there is no right and wrong. Many people on the religious side, they say, well, yes, it does come from will, but not our will. It comes from God's will.
Right.
And so as God's will changes, the content of right and wrong changes. And the question is there anything that's intrinsically right or intrinsically wrong that never changes?
Sure. So you get to that third category. And I think the natural inclination for a lot of people listening to us would say, so they're saying you have to believe in this nature's God, and you can't believe in the Judeo-Christian God or Allah or any other God who might say what's right and wrong and define that. And I want to be clear that is far from the case. Mm-hmm. And this is the argument I've made several times, and you've made it several times, and many scholars throughout history. This isn't something we invented. It's been something that goes all the way back to Aristotle. And that's the idea that you have these natural what's naturally morally good, what's naturally right, what are your natural rights, what is the natural law from nature's God. The Judeo-Christian God or your religious God doesn't necessarily have to define what that is to tell you what's right or wrong. He can reveal that natural right, and that's where religion can come in and can be so important in people's lives. And I can connect with people in that way.
Dave, I wish, had I been part of the conversation, and I wasn't, and I don't know how this would have gone, my suggestion, but as Moses was talking to God.
I think you were going this way.
I could have said, God, will you slip in just one more commandment, that 2 + 2 = 4? And here's why. If God had said 2 + 2 = 4, does that mean one can only know 2 + 2 = 4 by reading revealed commandments from God? And the answer would be no.
Right.
That's one way to learn it. Another way is to start studying numbers and come to understand what 2 means and what plus means and what the equal sign means, right, and what the number 4 represents. Yeah. And you can discover by reason that 2 + 2 = 4, or you could turn to Revelation. in something like the case of murder, right? God acknowledges through revelation, murder's wrong. You shouldn't murder. But even if you never, by all accounts, Aristotle had no access to the commandments that Moses brought down from Mount Sinai, and yet Aristotle, using his mind, could discover through reason that murder is inherently wrong, intrinsically wrong, regardless of what culture you come from or what language you speak or what color your skin is or anything like that. And so that's that important thing that I think I would qualify it this way: legitimate religions. And I'm saying something a little daring here and controversial. I'm suggesting there are illegitimate religions. I'm suggesting throughout history there have been false religions. There have been religions based on lies. And if a religion says, God has said, go murder.
Go sacrifice.
Go sacrifice. Yeah, go sacrifice children. Go sacrifice, young virgin women. I would be saying, I don't think any God actually said that. Right. I think you made that up, and it's a contrived religion. I mean, we have a large religion in our world today. Many adherents to Islam who say we need to implement Sharia. That is what our religion requires, and Sharia means finding apostates and finding infidels and doing things like cutting their heads off. My argument is that's not a real religion.
Right.
That's not a legitimate, no universal God actually revealed that. And so here's the point: legitimate religion and reason agree to a large extent on the content of the moral law, on the content of morality. It's just two paths to discover the same moral truth. And one way, if you're interested in testing your religion, is examine it by the standard of reason. Reason through. Do the things that your religion commands you to do or prohibits you from doing, is that reasonable? Is that rational? If the answer is yes, then that's probably a pretty good religion that you belong to.
Yeah.
If the answer is no, if you say, well, no, there's a wild difference between what my religion requires and what my mind knows is reasonable, you might want to rethink, your religion.
Well, you can take. There's so many things I want to respond to what you just said. First of all, on the Islam conversation, I would put a lot of those Islamic extremist conversations in the same categories I'd put Southern preachers during the time of slavery. We're not saying that everybody in Islam believes that you should be capturing infidels and cutting their heads off, or raping women because the women are your property and you should be able to control them and tell them what to do. But there are those who interpret the readings of the Quran and say that this is what we're commanded to do, the same way that there were Southern preachers going around saying, no, God told us we should have slaves. God told us exactly how we should have slaves. And we should be rejecting those ideas. And you, within your own religion, you should be having those conversations with people who are claiming that and saying, no, that makes our religion illegitimate because there are natural rights for all people. And that revelation of natural rights, it's interesting. We talk about special revelation, but if you just talk about the Ten Commandments, it's not necessarily God defining, okay, here's what I want your laws to be. It's God revealing what the natural law is. And you're sitting there talking about, I wish that you could have given God one more. If Mel Brooks was right in History of the World Part 1, maybe that was on the third tablet that he dropped as he was coming down the mountain.
That's a great scene. But you're absolutely right, and I want to emphasize this before we wrap up. Many Americans, many of our own members say the great crisis we're in, the great challenge we have is we need to prop up religion. We need more religious believers. We need more Americans to take their religion seriously. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. I would add that if you really want to help religion today, boost up the authority of reason, of natural moral reason, because what that does is that it helps to boost up this big realm of moral principles that both reason and revelation can agree upon. What we desperately need today, when someone says, well, I have these moral principles because I'm a Christian, or I have these moral principles because I'm Jewish. Okay, it makes their arguments more credible, more persuasive if we can say, though, by the way, those moral principles you uphold are also rational.
Right.
We can discover them through reason. They're part of the natural law.
That's so key. Think about that from the perspective of if you said to somebody, my religion is good because it advocates for what is naturally right.
Yes.
My religion is good because it advocates for what is naturally true. Mm-hmm. And you also think about all those people who say, you don't have to go to somebody who is an atheist or who is of a different religion. If you're Christian and somebody's Jewish and say, you should believe what I believe because my God is right.
Right.
You're saying, hey, this is naturally right. This is good. This is true. And both of our religions advocate for that. We get along. We can coexist in a good world.
And think of how that transforms American politics, American culture, American education. If we can agree that there's a ground of objective moral truth, that both reason, it's supported by both reason and revelation, and we agree to that, then all of our disagreements become much less divisive, much less dire, there's less at stake. If we all agree, sure, all Americans, in fact, all human beings have a natural right to their own property, their own liberty, their own life. We agree to that, and the law should protect these things. Then all of a sudden, our disagreements, we're back into the realm of I like one flavor of ice cream and you like the other, because we agree on the fundamental moral questions. Our disagreements would be in the realm of how we're going to protect rights.
And you also expand curiosity, which is, I think, what a lot of people who want to advocate for religion or for certain religions, they want people to be curious. They want people to come and do Bible study, or they want people to come and to be able to say, look, we both agree on this fundamental truth. We both agree on this fundamental natural right.
Right.
Here's how my God described it through the prophets, through special revelation. Here's how my God described it. Here's how my God talked about it. I would love, you might not have the same beliefs as I do, but I would love your input on how my God describes it, and to have a really nice dialogue, because at the end of the day, we both agree that there is a natural truth here. There's a natural good here. And it makes these conversations so much more interesting. It also welcomes people into your world in such a better place.
Absolutely. And in a way that might be the most pressing intellectual, philosophic, and ultimately political work that we have to do today, is recovering that common ground.
And I want to take that to the American founding as we wrap up. The American founding is the same.
Yes.
We're not saying that the American founding was good because our founders were good. We're not saying that Washington and Madison and Franklin were these divine characters who told us what is right. They didn't write the Declaration, and because they wrote it, it's good. They wrote down on paper what is naturally true. And we're advocating for that understanding of what they taught as naturally true is good.
One of my in my peculiar ways, I wrote 3 dissertations. I didn't finish all of them when I was in graduate school working on my PhD, and it was really a shifting of my interest and attention. But one of the dissertations I wrote, and I made much progress on it. I was looking at the sermons at the time of the American Revolution, because church pulpits, that was the most influential. When we talk about media today and marketing and advertising, well, nothing rivaled the influence of church sermons in North America in the years leading up to the Revolution. And I want to know what were those preachers saying. And I'm going to quote here from one of the most influential preachers of that pre-revolutionary period. He stood up on a Sunday morning in a church full of Christians, and he says, "We want not a special revelation from God to teach us that all human beings possess equal rights, that every human being has a right to their own life, to their own liberty, to their own personal property. That is inherent in the natural law of mankind." His point is right. We don't need a special revelation. We don't need to open the Bible to know that. That is a truth, just like 2 + 2 = 4, just like the interior angles of a triangle add up to 180 degrees. We can have truths that aren't necessarily spelled out in special revelation, and you can believe in revelation and still believe these truths. Discovering those kinds of truths that are accessible to the human mind is the fundamental project that we're in today.
Well, that is going to be how people are going to come back to the American founding. That's how we're going to overcome progressivism, is to start to understand truth, to start to spread truth, to start to talk about truth, and help people understand that you don't have to have the same backgrounds and the same beliefs to have the same truth, because truth is natural. It exists for all human beings. It's not specific to one group or another. And that's the fundamental difference between the American idea and the progressive idea. And we need to, as the guardians of the American idea, we need to continue to talk about that. And when that line gets crossed, when it's no longer you like chocolate and I like vanilla, sometimes you got to stand up and say, no, I'm not going to let you sit there and say, well, my truth is that slavery is okay. It just can't happen anymore.
That's part of what's required to guard the American idea.
Nos sumus custodes.
Yep.